Alright, hello everyone, my name is Disc, and in this video we have a level 16 Grim Batol. This was a 0 death run, pretty proud of it. It was on a perfect run and we're going to point out those areas as we get there. But as always, thanks for tuning in. Please check out my Metafy if you'd like any private lessons. I do share all of my UI elements with my students or members of the channel. And with that being said, we have a lot of major updates to them coming, so stay tuned. Everything is exactly the same, but just better. So done a lot of work to improve them and going to be sharing that. And then per usual, I do want to quickly flash the talents that we played in this key. So first off, I'm taking Phantom Reach. I don't do this always, but it really helps on the bird boss in here, having just a little extra range. And then I do play Prayer of Mend again here, so watch for those calls. Sue me, but I think it's the right play over Holy Nova. The idea is you just want a 10 stack, you play it in between pulls, and then it helps you in pulls. So really nice spell, I like it. And then Enduring Luminescence, I do think this is the right play. The cast time reduction and the atonement extension is massive, but you can run into problems misusing Radiant, so you just have to be really careful there. And then here is a spread of the damage, 488,000 overall. Pretty good number. I don't think it was the best parse in the world, but I honestly don't care. And then looking at the damage here, so I wanted to talk about it maybe a little bit differently than I have in the past. But we have the Entropic Rift on top for high uptime. We have the Void Wraith in second for high Torment average. We have the Dark Reprimand in a healthy third place from lots of bolts, lots of radiance. And then the Void Blast there, a part of my journey this season was getting more Void Blasts during its window. So really don't want to deter from Void Blasts while you have access to them, getting a lot of Void Blasts for the win. And then we have the Collapsing Void. So this is probably the main key mechanic of Discipline at the moment. There is a lot of nuance to min-maxing it, but being that it's such a short cooldown, we really just need to send this thing non-stop. Even if it's the end of a pull, which we'll see on the Lava Benders, we just have to be in good practice of force canceling our Rift. So cancel our Entropic Rift. We really never want to lose the value of that collapse. And then the only thing I'll say about healing is this is a heavy flash heal dungeon. I know that sounds weird saying, but in this dungeon I do use flash heal more than others. It's not only for our damage reduction proc, but it's also kind of to help keep the tank alive. It's a very volatile dungeon for tanks, and a lot of times as a pull is setting up, things can go wrong quick. So what I'll do is just like fade, and then just start spam flash healing the tank, dumping it a lot of mana, which does bring into play double drinking, which we'll talk about. So stay tuned, we'll talk about that in the video. And another focus we're going to highlight in the video is the timing of our spells on bosses. And here specifically, they're very, very scripted, and the damage profile barely matches our cooldown profile. So it's a tight dance, and the best word of wisdom I have is making sure you set your first healing window in time. Otherwise, you'll mess up the whole chain down the line. So a rule of thumb I go by is I start my opener at 5 seconds till damage. That way I have my Void Blasts, which are the meat of our window, when the damage is incoming. So I want all of the torments out of the way first, and I want to be all the way to the Void Blast before the damage, making sure that I am not late on the very first damage event. And then also, like always, if you're really looking to level up your gameplay's discipline, pay close attention to how these mini-games work. These are the best way to level up your gameplay. So we obviously have our torments and timing our torments, aiming for 8 with our executes, but then we also have to have our penance follow our dots. And then all the meanwhile, we want to track our schism. So I use focus targeting to do that. I have a macro for my smite to always funnel into my focus. That's a really nice way to manage schism. Then we have our mini game of defensives, pretty much always pressing fade and being really comfortable in doing it. Anytime there's incoming damage, we have a lot of talent points banked there, playing Desperate Prayer. We also have a lot of good opportunities for fear in this dungeon, so having a way to maximize that. I think we have one good example in here we can talk about. Then also in this dungeon, Shadow Meld is really important to protect your health, and a really easy way to use it, I have a weak aura that beeps at me anytime I'm targeted and have Shadow Meld available, and we see quite a few good examples in this run. And then the last little thing I wanted to say is a quick lesson in PI. So we have a bit of a pattern problem in this dungeon with our elemental shaman. He is a 3-minute ascendance to our 2-minute PI. We really don't want to lose too much uptime on our PI, but we really at the same time want to hit the ascendance as much as possible. And there is a solution to that, kind of the best of both worlds. I added a UI element here to watch for. We get a couple of examples. where I'm now tracking the Ascendant's proc. So that is a really good place to place your extra PI and not lose that uptime. So watch for that. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and clip over to the key. All right, here we go. So I have previewed this video. I do think I know my way through it pretty well. So let's see how these calls go.
2, 1.
But very important, we want to get good uptime on our PI. We also want to stagger our group defense. So Zephyr, Barrier, AG, plus personals. So pay attention to that. Everything is scripted and called out in Discord. And this first pull is really going to set the pace for the dungeon. A tight PI is really important. And we do have an example here of a 9 torment window. So when you have Lust and PI, you can get 2 rifts and 1 pet window. So we'll see that coming up. So before the hide, I pretty much got everything done. I found my Focus the Dragon. I have my PI out. I already re-banked Harsh Discipline proc. And I cast a Power Word Shield very last for the Words of the Pious. Okay, so I got 2 executes on the front end. We're setting up for this 9 torment window. Also have to hide though. And then right here. So this is our second rift. Came up in the same PI window for 9 torments and Room to Spare. So really only something you can do with all of that haste. And situationally, I would say you don't even want to do it like all the time. But that was just a full dump type of pull. So sending 2 rifts there was the play. And happy we get to show... Okay, see, in these pulls you have to track the Rive. That's the only thing I'm tracking on nameplates. And I paints up the first one. And what I was saying is really happy since my missed video last. I've updated my Dominate Mind display to make it vertical. I think that is a lot better than what it was. But we're playing Dominate Mind here just to kind of take one of the casters out of play for a moment.
Breaking in 10.
And yeah, all we have to watch for here is the tank. And we're watching for that Rive. So if you see on the left side of my nameplate cluster, there's 1 spell there, and that's our Rive. We also see the targeted cast weak are highlighted in white on the cast. So if you're really trying to get through this pull smoothly, Pain Sups on Rives, Barriers on Rives, Raptures on Rives, Shields on Rives. I think we also get a good Shadow Meld example coming up here. Okay, so let's see, we're about to have our second pet. Here it goes. Pet, Rift, Penance, Death. 2 deaths on the front end. Falling back to our Schism. Working in a Radiance as always. And another 7 torments. First was 9. The second one, I don't know how many torments I got, but then 7, so we're doing pretty good. And this is a full send with Pet and Rift. So notice as soon as I got my next Rift up, it was sent. Harsh Discipline was played to buy the extra bolts. And arguably the only thing I could have done differently there is play the Pet too. So the Pet came up right at the very end. I could have gotten a couple of torments that way, but not too big of a deal. And in this roleplay, I don't ever like sending my 1s on the first group because I feel like everyone else kind of does that naturally. So I'm backloading things. And we didn't do this perfectly. I've seen it done better, but I would say it was 9 out of 10. And my last one here could have been better. Oh. Yeah, I should have just been quicker with that, and I think I would have gotten the hit. Maybe I did. It's hard to say, but we do have a small little pull here. This bird. Refreshing my palm in between combat. And this is an example of flash healing. So I spread my first round of dots, I find my focus target, and while I'm faded, I'm just flash healing Val. Just want to keep him up. Okay, so here is our second PI on Ascendance. My focus target is already found. Atonements are out. We see immunities in party. That teal overlay is immune. One of the upgrades to my grid 2. So a couple of executes. We're doing good here. Let's see how many torments we get. Switch targets to preserve my dots. 6, 7, 8. So at the moment, my torment average is really high. That was almost a greed play, but we did get it off. And not to forget, so although we have the Umbral Wind, we still have the Rives. So this is a pull where we have to kind of track 2 spells at least. I try to only track 1 spell per pull, but that is a 2 spell pull. But all we have to do on this boss is use Fade and Shield anytime there's an attack, stagger our group defensives with our personal defensives, and as for the timing of our spells, we just want to cast our Mind Blast after the Roar, and the Collapse will happen after the Rock Spike. And it's a rinse and repeat type of boss. Full rotation first, followed by half rotation, cycling back and forth. But what I want to focus on here mainly is the Rock Spike mismanagement. So I faded my first one off. That's going to come in handy later. A little foreshadowing. But so far we have 2 Rock Spikes laid in Isle 1. And we're going to have a focus on Noth here. Everyone was atoned for the lenience before the attack, and here goes the half rotation. So notice whereas I'm stepping laterally from the outside in, Noth again is filing them on top of each other vertically. So whereas I'm laying them laterally, he's laying them vertically, and so far we have 5 all in Isle 1. And I think you can tell where this is going. Fade is used, personal shield is on, that time was barrier. And the rotation happens after the Roar. So here's another Rock Spike, noticing Noth literally going out of his way on his pony to file another one in Isle 1. Rapture covers this one. Rip Rapture. Mind Blast after the attack. And if you notice how unlucky we're getting with our placement, we're having to be in Isle 1 quite often. So my approach is I'm filling outside in, taking a lateral step. Right there is the indicator for Lapaka's Ascendance proc. Would have been a bait though. And noticing my cast bar here. So that is how I precast Radiance. It doesn't call for it anytime there is damage, but right on top of my cast bar is my target's cast bar. And it is a really nice system to start precasting. Okay, there's our PI on the Real Ascendance. We had another Rock Spike placed in Isle 1 by Noth. Atonements are out for the Lenience, Fade, and Personal Shield. That was our Zephyr round. And what do you know? We're back in Isle 1, where we have nowhere to stand. And thankfully, our Shadow Meld came back up. So that kind of got us through there, but you can see people are dying. It's because we're having these overlapping damaging events with the ground damage. We are biting ourselves in the foot with that mismanagement. It is a little cringe. But that was a personal defensive round. And we're back in Isle 1. And so the problem is now also we have to stand in Isle 1 and we actually can't even get out of Isle 1 to place the Rock Spikes anywhere else. We have filled literally just one side of our room. Beta in Personal Shield. Mind Blast is happening after the Roar. I think arguably that one was a little early, so watch the collapse here. I think it's a miss. I think it was a very slight miss. So you don't want to be too early on the Mind Blast. I believe I go into Final Rapture here just for safety. Yeah. And yeah, Moot Subject, I'm going to miss Rapture, I think. But a better way to play Rapture, I did not give you good examples there, is you lead into your Rapture with a regular shield. That is still plenty death prevention, and you get more shields. Okay, and then in these pulls, definitely want to stagger defense. We have plenty of time before the first boss. Noticing on the left side of the nameplate cluster, I am just tracking one spell. That is where we want to time our heals. And on the right side of nameplates is interrupts and CC. Really important to work in your Psychic Scream in these areas. And a small change that I've made, it might seem really subtle, but I think these subtleties are what lead to a strong UI, essentially. But with our Psychic Scream here, I'm focusing on interrupting the Chained Mind. And the way that goes, it's a cast followed by a channel. You want to let it cast and eat the cooldown before you do the interrupt. And what Bigwigs does is it beeps at you on the cast start rather than the channel start. So that is something I've changed my back end to only get an audible cue once the channel has begun, if it begins. And I think that is a pretty good way of taking some audibles just simply out of your play. And then in this pull, I think we have a really good Shadow Meld example, so let's look for that. So I'm holding some Raptures here. I also have no mana. Okay, so I have this little box popping up on my unit frame. If you watch, that means I'm getting targeted and Shadow Meld is up. The best play for Shadow Meld here is not on a Bolt, but on a Chained Mind, like right there. There it was. So the Bolt, I saw it coming, and I gave myself a Rapture Shield, followed by the Chained Mind. That is the only one you can't fear off yourself. So it is a really good spot for Shadow Meld. And as you might have noticed, we are completely out of mana, but we should be able to fit at least one more Entropic Rift. And we are going to need it for the heals as well. So making sure we force its collapse before atonements drop off. So watch how I play that here. Collapse and a couple of executes. So we are going to need to double drink. That is a major play here. And going into the first boss, we have a weird cycle of spells, but we do want to lead with a full rotation, and we want to time it about 5 seconds before the damage. And it is very important to hit the first rotation in time, and that will set you up for success throughout the entire fight. Alright, so we have our kill target marked as Skull, and the most important thing is get our opener started at 5 seconds till damage, which is what we've done. And what that will set you up for is your Void Blast covering the damage event. That is the strongest part of our rotation. And also kind of just in theme of Bigwigs, notice all of the sounds here for the audibles are different. And that was something I made a change to pretty recently. I noticed Bigwigs did not do a good job at assigning audibles here by default. They all kind of sounded the same. So that's something you also need to pay attention to. Making sure in a pull like this, where if you need to hear the sound of multiple casts, that they're different, so you can like discern them. And then here's our first overlap. So back to the fight itself. When it comes to pairing our cooldowns with the fight, we start with a full rotation, half rotation, full, and then it switches to half-half full, half-half full. And so here comes the half-half full. All we want to do is play our Rift, and you want to play it preemptive of the damage. And so my timing was right, but obviously not the best. Not the best for atonement coverage there. I'm playing my Radiance in the wrong spot, and it's leading to a little bit of a break in healing. And I did it 2 in a row here, so we'll see the same thing happen. My collapse goes off, and the full group isn't atoned. But anyway, we are back to the full rotation. And all we want to do is have a plan, if we're picked with the dot, to play a defensive. So I'm picked Desperate Prayers first in priority. And Zephyr was on the first overlap, Barrier's the choice for the second. And you just want to make sure everything happens a little preemptive of the damage. And I kind of start things at the 5 second mark. So paying attention to the Mind Blast here, it is played immediately when it comes available. And this Radiance is much better. So I Radiance during, and everyone is covered for the collapse. And right here is just an area where I PI Lapaka, even though he's not in Ascendant, to focus on my uptime for that spell. Okay, yeah, so I kind of wised up. My first couple of rounds, my Radiance was in the wrong spot, but we are there now. So here comes an overlap. We don't have Barrier, but we can go ahead and drop some Raptures. And this is an example where, for the second time in a row, I was picked to have the dot. I had the double mechanic. I did not have Desperate Prayer, but I did have a Pain Sup. So I always look at Pain Sups as personal defensives in a case like that. So that was Rapture paired with Pain Sup paired with a full rotation. And just because the boss is about to die, we cannot miss our half rotation here. We send the Rift, an early Force Collapse to make sure we get the healing value, a couple of executes, and we are good to go. So Palm out of combat, we have a 5 stack. I don't think I play it perfectly here, but the better play is to have a 10 stack. Okay, there's our 10, actually. And we have one attack we're tracking here. We led with a Zephyr on the first, a personal shield as always. And here goes the rotation. So one thing I'm kind of thinking in the back of my mind is if the collapse of the Rift happens in about 11 seconds, I want to time that with the AoE attack. So here comes the example. We're at 10 seconds away to the attack. I'm holding the Rift for just a second to make sure that the collapse happens after. And actually it looks like I'm going for a full rotation here. So Smite Spam, a Thing of the Past. Yep, I go for full. So the only thing I'm thinking if I go for a full this late in the pull is where's my cooldown going to be on next pull? So let's just use this as an experiment. And finally, rapturing off that Tank Buster in a Forced Collapse. 5 Torments. Pet is 30 seconds away. Dropping shields for the CDR. Refresh Palm, we have a 9 stack. And this pull is big. So our call is we're going to kill the Flame Render first, the biggest threat here in a sense. I do have PI, we also have Ascendance. There's PI. Looks like I'm doing just a little bit of smite farming for our pet. Flame Render's about dead. I switch over to the Lava Bender and I go ahead and send the pet. And you really, for safety, want to backload the pet after the 50% mark. We do see that marked on the nameplate. And this is where I do believe we get an extra Mind Blast and Rift. So pay attention to that. So the mob is about dead, but we still got to heal. So the Rift is out. Force Collapse for the healing. Execute, and we are 100% health. Palm out of combat. Finding the Darkest Red mob. In this pull, it's the Enforcer. This is just a pump style pull. We want as many pets and as many rifts as we can fit in here. So let's see how many we get. Radiance during my window. Okay, first rift is over. Switch targets to preserve my dots. Radiance plus a shield plus a pain sup just because I'm at a 2 stack into my second rift. And then I'm also sending my second pet here, just getting as much as I can. So when you think about the next pull, which also has a lava bender, since we want to backload the pet, the start of a pull is generally just a half rotation, just the rift. So I didn't mind sending my pet there. If you notice, he's 30 seconds away because the start of this pull is just a little bit of reset. And the call here again is we want to focus the Flame Render down. That is the bigger threat than the Lava Bender. Rift is out as planned. And if you notice Lapaka right there, he got a glow indicating he was proccing his Ascendance. And this is where we're going to pick up a little bit of uptime on our PI. Still hitting the most valuable spell in the group, noticing his damage is doing really well. And now that we are across the 50 line, this is where we backload our pet and our rift. Looks like we also have Zephyr and AG rolling, not to count those out. And looking at my spells, so we have Barrier available. And this is similar. So we have a little bit of time to kill here. We're really not trying to rush it. Our timer is Gucci. So we do want to go for a full rotation here. Just getting my pet back, it looks like. Okay, here's our pet. We're holding a Harsh Discipline proc. And let's aim for at least a 6 torment windows. Let's see what I get here. Weaving in a Radiance as always. Kind of looking forward to that Radiance change where it's 40 yards. I think the play is going to be just to Radiance the tank always. So really nice implications there. You don't have to pick who you're Radiancing. It's just like a basic cast. Okay, so sending a second Rift. So notice here, even though the pull is almost expired, it is short enough cooldown that you can do that and force the collapse and still get a lot of value. And here's another Lava Bender pull, and we have a slight pattern problem with our PI, and it's just the nature of a 3-minute Ascendance. So there goes his Ascendance, and I am 10 seconds away, but I think we both just have to send spells. And just like the other Lava Bender pulls, we start with a half rotation. We are backloading the pet and the Rift. And the group defense this time is my barrier. That is all we have. So I PI'd when I could. Barrier is down preemptive. And now we throw the full. Radiance. Collapse. And everyone's full health. And then, yep, so we're going to pull like this with 2 Flame Renders. So those are the threatening ones. We have been in good practice. I'm marking Skull. And we're coordinating our damage onto 1. Just to take it out of play quickly. And I think I also get a Fear here, so watch for that. We're listening for the raid warning from Bigwigs. It is the sound for the Tank Buster. That one. Okay, and it looks like I'm holding pet at this point. Maybe not the best play, but I am sending the Rift. Let's see. There was my Fear. So the way these pulls go, generally a tank will cover the first round of attacks, and then you can backload your Fear. Okay, we have another double drink for the win. Notice how fast that mana is going up. And this is a dungeon. I think it's just due to everything, but honestly a lot of the flash heals too. But we just have to dump a lot of mana to be safe. Okay, and I delay just a second here to time with the curses. A 5 stack of Prayer Mending is out. And before the boss lands, I wanted to give a focus to these fixate mechanics. So a lot of mechanics are meant to counter with a spell. These are not one of those mechanics. You do have to kill them, but it is just a mechanic where you run. And that is it. So I'm about to get selected. Notice how my UI handles this. There is a buzz, a glow on the nameplate, and this is the only attack I will use a Bigwigs message for. Fixate on you. Okay, so we have a couple of palms out, a 5 and a 7. I'd rather a 10, but let's see how those go. And just like all the other bosses, timing our first window is the most important. And we want to start our opener at 5 seconds till the buffet. So here it goes. We're at the 5-second mark. And we honestly want our first round of Torments plus the Radiance all out of the way before the hit. And that was a really good example where we were all covered with Atonements for the collapse. And in this phase, we just have to get our pet back. So well-timed PI, and I'm just smiting to get my pet back. Again, we're aiming for that 5-second mark on the buffet. We're at 10. A couple of flash heals, a shield for my Words of the Pious. And I start my opener at 5 till buffet. And this is an area where Phantom Reach does come in handy. You never want to get punted away from your tank when he's not atoned. So the last thing I do there is make sure he's holding a Renew. And it's just rinse and repeat. As long as you time your opener at 5 seconds till, what we're setting up is for the collapse to happen right after the knockback. And that is the safest way to guard your team, is make sure that collapse happens where you want it, because you will be in the air and unable to heal. Okay, so let's see. The opener's out of the way, the Radiance is out of the way, and the collapse happens there. And then all you have to do is just make sure you stagger defensives. So in a group like this, we kind of open with the Zephyr. I believe the second round is I called for personals across the board, and then that was a barrier. If you want to get picky, a slight better way to play barrier is a little earlier to allow people to kind of get into it. But I almost missed it there, but I barely had it and just laid it on my team. I think it got 3 of the 5, which is fine. Okay, so opener's done. Radiance is done. We're knocked back. I think I get a couple of executes here. One execute, I killed it. And then the only thing to think about is PI is about 10 seconds away. We really want another round, I think. Where do we hold? I forget. Okay. Couple of flash heals. A shield for Words of the Pious. We're at the 5-second till mark. First round of Torments plus the Radiance plus a shield. All before the knockback. And this paints up, I think, might have been a total waste, but it's okay. He was having to reposition just due to the game sucking. Totally didn't need it. Would have rather had one more paints up in the book, but the best quality to have in WoW is being able to adapt on the fly. So we just gotta go with it. So we have a Flame Render here. I've marked him Skull, and this is another pull where we just want to send as many pets and rifts as possible. So let's see what we get. 5 stack of Palm going in. A double proc on the Harsh Discipline. PI the Ascendants. A Flame Render Melted. Here comes the second Rift. And I'm holding. So I'm just getting a little bit of CDR. Slight miss, potentially. Oh no, so we chained in these guys, and I riffed these guys. And coming up in here, the single target attack is indicated by my targeted cast weak aura, but in a key like this, gambling with your health is just not the right play. The better thing to do with that targeted cast is line of sight it, and we get some good practice here with that. 8 stack of Palm going in. I have my focus target picked, the darkest red, and we want to use the corner to line of sight the attack. If every single one lands, your group is going to be in defensive, a defensive deficit. What am I saying? Okay, so here goes a full rotation. Pet and Rift are out. A couple of executes on the little ones. Tracking the attack on the nameplate. Line of sight for the win. And when you're practicing line of sight like this, I guess the best word of wisdom is just be as close to the corner as possible so that your sidestep doesn't have to be wide. And there was an example. It was a slight mess up, thanks to Noth for the save there though. But we're really trying to hold Shadow Meld here. We have a technique coming up, which I will show you guys. Here goes a Pet and Rift. A couple of executes on the small ones. The targeted cast and Shadow Meld weak auras are both popping off. Okay, I have Rift to send. I have a Harsh Discipline proc as well. Standing really close to the corner. But I did want to go ahead and start talking about boss coming up a little bit. This is a re-recording. I think I can do it better than I did the first time, focus on some different things. But the main mechanic in this whole dungeon that scares me is the Abyssal Corruption. We talked about it before we ran the key. I was pretty worried about it, and like I thought was going to happen, it was our worst executed mechanic in here. And thankfully we still had 0 deaths, but we'll see it happen and we'll talk about it. So this is the meld tech I wanted to show. So we tag immediately meld. What that does is takes the stacking dot mechanic out of play. So when these guys die, they apply a dot that stacks. It amplifies shadow damage of the single target attack and is pretty lethal. So there goes PI. Noticing we have Paladin externals covering the single target attacks. They are also great places for defensive penance, and you definitely don't want to hold back on your personals here. You need to use them. So back to boss. We want to pay really close attention to the Abyssal Corruption attack. I'm going to try and call them as they happen. But that is where you want to use personal defensives. On the group-wide AoE is where we stagger our raid defensives. So Zephyr, Barrier, Raptures, AG. We want to play Fade on each one. And personals are for the 2-target cleave attack. So we have a 10 stack of Palm. That is great. The call is do not pull until I have full atonements in party. Because on pull, the first thing we have to do is dot and immediately get into our torment rotation. Fade is used on each one of these, working in a radiance. And here comes our first corruption attack, which is a total fail. So watching Lapaka, it is a little bit unfortunate, but in these areas we want defensive penance, we want a rapture out, we want to call our focus target for healing. And watch Lapaka here. He runs right into a tentacle and is selected with a corruption attack. Thankfully, quick reactions from the team, but it prevented the telegraph of that attack from loading, and then was standing directly on top of myself and the Ret Paladin. So mechanic 1 was a fail. But here comes our next Void Surge. The call here is Barrier. Play Fade as always. The opener started at 5 till the damage. Work in a Radiance. And you can always try and get some extra executes on these little ads. And here comes Corruption number 2. This is one of the good ones, and it was because I was picked. But you want a defensive penance proc loaded. You want a Rift out. You want to call your target. Find an aerial view. And if you're picked, defensive immediately. So I'm picked, immediately hit Desperate Prayer and Fade. I'm flash healing myself for the damage reduction, penance procs, and watching Noth here, he uses his bubble. You might have to replay that, but he didn't quite judge the duration of that attack well enough and used his bubble after the attack ended. So we needed that spell for clearing. We didn't have much in the field yet, but we went ahead and cleared what we could. So that attack, we just preemptively loaded our Pet and Rift. AG from the Shaman was the modifier, and here comes the third corruption attack. So you're bound to take ticks of damage sometimes. Watching the Aug and the Ret Paladin here, you just have to get out of attacks ASAP. So the problem the Aug is having is he stood in it the entire time, and the Ret Paladin, although he did get out, he still took, I think, 3 or 4 ticks of damage. So if you're ever in a spot like that where you're just bound to take some damage, you just have to get out of it ASAP. A couple of executes on these mobs. Zephyr is our modifier for the win. And this one is a little bit better, but we still have a mistake coming from Noth in underestimating the duration of this attack. So a defensive penance is procced, aerial view, and I call Lapaka. So I'm focusing Lapaka, and then now watching Noth's position, he misjudges the duration of the attack and mows down again the tank and the healer. So just a slight miss there. Thankfully there were no deaths. But going into this Void Surge, this is likely the last one, so I'm just doing a bit of a spell dump. So we're using Rapture as a buffer. Pet and Rift out 5 seconds before the damage. Evoker about grips me into tentacles. Casting a Radiance during the Rift for full recovery of damage. Good clear from the Paladin. This is a better time to use bubble and clear. There are more to eat. Getting a defensive penance proc. And I believe I call Aug. Yeah, so this was another good attack. Just how it should be done. No overlapping, no shared damage, no debuff, and it becomes very easy. A final PI on the Ascendant's proc, and I'm going for a damage grab here. Rift is out, 3 torments, 4 torments, early collapse not to miss the value for the win. So probably my most proud key of all season, ending it with 3476. I do believe that is title safe. It was a run where everyone got IO, even some single points, so that is pretty cool. But all in all, I think Grim Batol is a really fun key. It just demands high coordination. You know, every dungeon has its crooks, and I think Grim Batol's is high coordination and high teamwork. You know, staggering your raid defensive, staggering your kicks, things like that. But here's a quick look at the damage. Pretty expected. We've already talked about it at the front of this key. And then I think I also splash healing. Yep, so look at the Prayer of Mending. We're right at 8 million. That's only about a health bar, but a spell that we cast out of combat that impacts us in combat, I think is invaluable, and it's been really fun weaving that into my rotation. But yeah, thanks everyone who has tuned in over the season. I really appreciate all the love and support through Metafy, my memberships. Stay tuned for Season 2. Let me know your thoughts if you're looking forward to playing Discipline. And until next time, Disc.